Hey everyone, welcome to the EverydayFI podcast, the show that explores the lives and stories of everyday people in the financial independence community. Today I'll be chatting with Kathy, who came to FI much later than most of us in this community. In this episode, you'll hear Kathy's harrowing story about being adopted by a middle-class family with alcoholic parents and how that affected her money philosophies as an adult. Kathy also shares her biggest desire, which is to help blind and deaf people, and you'll get to hear her take on what couples must do before they get married. Tune in after we hear from our sponsors. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show, and thanks for listening. I love that you guys have followed me for this long. It's so great to do these episodes. And I'm really excited today because I'm speaking with Kathy, who I met at Camp FI Mid-Atlantic. And she actually shared some of her numbers with us, was very brave in doing so because her story is a little bit different than ours. And I'm excited to have her on the show. Hey, Kathy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, everyone. My name is Kathy Cortopassi. I have 5 kids and 12 grandkids. I own a business that does captioning for people who have hearing loss. And I also have a job as a court reporter. I was married 38 years, and 1 year ago, my husband died, and that's what threw me into the FI journey.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I remember you talking about that at Camp FI, and it really moved all of us in the audience when you kind of were giving your numbers because, 38 years of marriage that's a long time. I'm 37 myself, and even if we got married today, I'm not even sure we'd be together for 38 years. And so that's incredible that you guys were together for so long. What I really liked about meeting you is, like I said before, is how brave you were in sharing your numbers, because I remember you mentioning to us that you were a little bit nervous about it because some people at Camp FI are like, oh, I have $2 million, I have $1 million, and I'm only 40. And I get that. Maybe not to the same level as you, but I get the feeling of being behind, especially in a community like this where people are retiring at 30. And me being 37, I only have $150,000 saved up, and it doesn't feel like a lot compared to the 2 million. So it's not quite the same, but I definitely get where you're coming from there. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us. That's really cool that you have a job where you do captioning for people who have hearing loss. Tell me how you got into that. How did you start that business? When did you start that business?
I first started out as a court reporter in the Chicagoland area. Did that for a while working for others and said, wait a minute, why am I helping build someone else's empire? Why don't I launch off and start my own? And I did. And before you knew it, I had a few clients that were calling me, and I had a business going there. But it was growing and it was doing great. I had 9 people working for me. And it was, that was pretty interesting, having very expensive independent contractors working for you, where the government is your number one client and you have to wait and wait to be paid. That was quite a rude awakening into the business world. Then I had 6 relatives die in 18 months, and 3 of them I had to help take care of the estate and clean out the house and put everything for sale and still keep the business running. I decided that business is a very stressful business to be in when life hits. And so I had trained nationally to be able to provide the service of captioning. And someone called me out of the blue and said, hey, did you ever think about helping the deaf and hard of hearing? And I said, yes, of course, I'd love to. And so that person trained me. I started doing that with her for quite a while. And, when it became obvious that she's growing and therefore she's expanding the job hours, she's dividing that between all these people. And, my income started to be affected. And I said, okay, I think I need to start my own business again. And so I decided I'm going to do what she did, except I'm going to do it in Indiana. And I still have most of those clients today from doing that. And so it's wonderful. And I'm still an Indiana corporation, so that does help things. But I started doing that, and that's this kind of service that takes you around the world, and you get to serve people around the world as well too. It's not just an in-person job, it's something we can do remote for people all over the world at all times of the day.
That's incredible. And how long has it been since you started your version of the business in Indiana?
I started that in 2011.
Oh, that's amazing. So 13 years going strong. That's great. How does being an Indiana corporation help? I think you said it was helpful being an Indiana business. What do you mean by that?
It helps me with my Indiana clients as opposed to others that try to enter the field. And so I can compete on that and say, I'm an Indiana corporation. Are they? And that does make a difference to some of these businesses.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. So it's a competitive edge that you have. That's awesome. And are you planning on continuing with this work into retirement, or are you planning on retiring completely and stopping working at some point?
The captioning business is so easy for me. The clients that I have, it's really almost runs by itself, just very little hands-on work required at the level that I'm at. When I had another client that we had to separate ways, he worked me to the bone and I think he helped contribute to my husband's death actually because of the stress he put us under. So sometimes you just have to realize, some business is not worth the stress that it puts you under. And we've had quality of life ever since we had to say goodbye to him. But, at the level that I'm at right now, which is smaller than when I had that other client, it's a much more manageable business. So I might have it into retirement, but I might package it up and sell it one day as well too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, I'm curious. So it sounds like your husband and you ran the company together. Is that correct?
He did when we moved out of Indiana to South Carolina. That's when I had met my birth mother. And so I wanted, all the kids were gone and everything. So I wanted to spend her last years with her and, really get to know her and my birth family. And we did. So that meant my husband, gladly at that point quit his job. And okay, so what am I going to do now? It's, well, I would like to go do this instead. How about if you take over management of the business? And, that took some time, but, he had been with me all those years anyway. So he had the most knowledge of anyone. So he took it on and he became the manager of the business and did that until about a year before his death and mainly precipitated by the illness that he got that did lead to his death.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What goes into having a captions business? What's your day to day like? And if somebody wanted to start a business like this for themselves, what advice would you give to them?
First of all, it's a very volatile business right now. So I can't honestly say that it is something that I would suggest you start and get into. Another thing is it requires specialized skills and training. To do real-time captioning, you really have to be the best of the best as far as the court reporters go. And so we compete. When you get to that level of court reporting where you're the best of the best, it means you can also make the most money. And so if you're going to start providing captioning services, it better equal what you could get in the court reporting world. Or you better give the quality of life, the family life issues, work-life balance. If you can provide that and they can make the same amount of money, then you're fine. But with all the ASR that's coming up, that's automatic speech recognition, the smaller stations around the country have, for the most part, or all, I'm not sure, but for the most part, they have taken that part of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, that says reasonable accommodation. And they have taken it to say, well, free means reasonable. It's reasonable to us. We don't have to pay so much money. Now we can run our businesses more profitably. And so they stopped paying the live captioners and that provided the 99% accuracy. And now they use the automatic speech recognition, which those of us in the industry call craptioning. It is certainly not anything that was the excellence that they had, but it's reasonable accommodations. And that's where we're at. So it's hard to compete against free. So I wouldn't recommend anybody start the business that's not already in the industry and understands it, has connections, and knows how to really work the business to make profits. I would suggest that people get into the career of court reporting, however. There is so much demand and so much need for that I beg people to consider it. For all these years, the trend has been to send your kid to college. They've got to get a 4-year degree if they're going to make any great money. Well, we're beginning to see that might not have been the best idea when we saddle our kids with, hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And like you can't find a job or in your field where you're training, so the court reporting is a phenomenal job. There's so many opportunities. There's 7 different professions associated with it. So if you don't like one, you've got 6 others you can get into. And, the majority of us are, I'll call it aging out. 20 years with the state, you could retire. 20 years with the feds, you could retire. And, those folks are not all that old, but, if you could retire or you could work, what are you going to do? The FI world understands that more than anything. So we have tremendous openings that when I started the career, there was no way I would have gotten in those jobs. And I'm telling you, not until really right now, the jobs that I wanted way back when, I mean, there are plenty now, but they were not open. And, it was one of those, if you know a judge, if you know a senator or something, then you could get the job. But today, the court reporting is a phenomenal, good job. And so I totally recommend people to look into that.
Yeah, I agree that our community is kind of leading the charge on your kids don't have to go to college. And there's actually a really great episode on the podcast called Her Money with Jean Chatsky. And she brought on a guest, and I'm not going to get any of the names right, but she was about not having a degree. I'm going to link the episode in the show notes, of course. And her business is all about how to train kids who are in high school to think outside the box when it comes to their future careers. Because she's like, why are we tasking these 16, 17-year-olds with deciding what they're going to do with the rest of their lives at this age? That's ridiculous. And then they have to go get a 4-year degree for that. And then they might not even use that 4-year degree, like me. And when you look at statistics about how many people actually use the degrees they have, it's actually pretty low. And yet they're paying all this debt. And then it's also very interesting that job descriptions are like, oh, I require a 4-year degree. Why? What does that prove? It proves that you can sit at a desk and listen and take notes and take a test. How is that contributing to a job? I will say I really enjoyed college, but it was a very expensive enjoyment. And yeah, I'm with you on that. My partner and I have talked about the way we want to raise kids because we're looking at like our financial plan and how saving for college fits into that. And we're like, do we even want to save for college, or do we want to save for some sort of opportunity that they might have, and maybe talk to them about all of their options? Court reporting, being a nurse, being a plumber, being a blogger, being, whatever they want to do, go swim with the dolphins, do whatever you want to do. And if they really do want to be like a doctor or a lawyer, yeah, school is going to be, required. But it's something that I think we can broaden our minds about. I really love that you brought that up. So thank you very much.
I have some links as well, too, that I can give you that would give people the places to go to learn how they could learn court reporters. There's actually 2 free programs that the first semester is free. So it's a try it before you buy it. So if you like it, you are not out any money. And, if you don't like it, move on. So I wish colleges would do that as well, too.
I would love to get those links from you, and I'll put those in the show notes as well. Thank you. Okay, so let's dive into your money story. I'm very curious. You said that you went to find your birth mother. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's an amazing story, actually. Yes, I was adopted. I did learn who my birth mother was, and I lived near her for 8 years. All of us, the family that adopted me and the mother and father who gave me up for adoption, all lived in Illinois my entire life, and I did not know it. So when the Illinois opened up the adoption records and gave those of us who were adopted the opportunity to try to find our birth parents, but it had to go through the courts and only through this specific way, I signed up. And a day after I, went through the paperwork or whatever I had to do, the day afterwards, the lady called me back and said, I found your birth mother and she's interested in meeting you. Are you sure you want to meet her? So it was 24 hours. It was fantastic. So it was an amazing experience. And I just visited my birth father a couple weeks ago, in fact, when I was back in the Illinois area. And funny things is that he's a multimillionaire. But yes, I was adopted by two very middle class people. My dad was a police officer. My mom was a caterer. So both of my mothers and my birth father were all business people. So it was an interesting experience as a kid, seeing what money my mom made and the freedom that she had versus the money my dad made and the stress level that he had as a job. And so that kind of did impact my thinking. I didn't realize it, but it impacted my thinking as far as am I going to get a job just like him as well too, or am I going to do something to own my own destiny? So that really did affect me, I think. And then on top of it all, I was brought to the home where I was raised, and it just happened to be a block away from the man I would marry.
Well, that just seemed like fate right there. So romantic. Okay, I want to back up a little bit. You said that your birth parents were both business people and your adoptive parents were middle class W-2 employees, but you were raised by the latter, and that definitely affected you in your adult money philosophies. Can you tell me a little bit about why? And here's where we can start with, what is one of your earliest money memories with your adoptive parents?
Well, I can remember dad, the adoptive dad. So he was dad to me. I was raised with him. He was always, we don't have money for that. We don't have money for that. We don't have money for that. And yes, he did have money because I could promise you, mom paid all the bills. I don't know what the heck happened with his money, but being an alcoholic affected the way he thought. And so we as a family had to deal with that. Mom, on the other hand, was a caterer and only worked the weekends. But yet that woman brought home $10,000 every weekend. And so I thought, man, yes, we work our butts off because I worked with her starting from 12 years old on. And so we worked our butts off, for the day or the 2 days. And then she did a little bit of the ordering in front of that. But that's still good money. That's much more than my dad made. And so I thought, maybe I'll take this business over one day. She had other plans for me. And I truly believe that because I'm a Christian, I'm a believer. And so I truly believe God had other plans as well for me too. Mom never taught me how to cook. Never. So here are the greatest cook in the whole wide world, and hundreds, if not thousands of people thought my mom was the best cook in the world. She never taught me how to cook. She would not let me learn. She would, stand at the door. You can watch me. You can take notes, but she did not want me to take over the business. I learned and put two and two together without her admitting it. She took over the business from my grandmother. My grandmother got to the point to where she just sat there. She was basically too old and tired, but she was the owner and she gave the directions and things like that. My mom saw herself getting older and she began to think that she doesn't want to become that grandmother that's sitting there with me taking over. And so that's, I think, the reason. She just worked to the very end and she wouldn't let me take over. She wanted to be the boss, and she was to the end.
That's very interesting. And thank you for sharing that. It sounds like that's challenging that your mother wouldn't share her gift with you. But I'm glad that you saw that, as you said, God had other plans for you. I didn't realize that your mother owned the catering business. So that's amazing. And then your dad was basically a government employee, being a police officer. How did they talk about money amongst each other? What was that like? Do you remember anything about those conversations?
I sure do. And both of them, well, dad being the alcoholic, mom would drink with him in order to have something in common with each other. And their talks about money were arguments about money. you know you should pay this bill. I'm paying all these bills. You make a salary too. Why don't you pay some of these? And it was just fighting over money all the time. And so anything we ever needed, my brother and I, it was never go to dad. Mom would take care of it. And we probably made her broke doing that because we were pretty spoiled kids. And I say middle class, but to me it felt like we were rich. I mean, just almost anything I wanted, I got. So I was a pretty spoiled brat kid. And I think that affected my life future because, I'm going to work for the money that I'm going to earn. I'm not going to be dependent on somebody else saying no, so I really do think that that affected me as well too. But there was no lessons in the house about how to balance a checkbook, about how to save money, no discussions about their retirement and their insurance. And in fact, I know that dad bought us whole life policies and he thought he was doing a good thing. So I don't think they understood money at all, truly. And my mom certainly did not have any sort of retirement. And I know that from when dad died, when I got to see what everything was. It was sad. It was really sad. All those years of working hard, making money, and very little to show for it at the end.
Yeah, it's a story that's unfortunately all too common, I think, in America right now. And I don't know why. Our country doesn't teach us that very well. Like most of us had to make pretty big mistakes to even get that kind of an education. I mean, I know I did. And the people who grew up in homes where finances were talked about regularly are very lucky and probably not very common. And, to be fair on your dad, like those whole life salespeople are very sleazy and smooth talkers. So they probably made him think that it was the best investment that he could possibly do for his family. But yeah, thank you for sharing. I am curious about you alluded to some of this, but how would you say this kind of upbringing where your mom owned a business, she made more money than your dad, they were retired on a pension, didn't have any retirement savings, they fought about money. How did all of those experiences affect you as an adult? Do you see any parallels in the way that you handled and viewed money as an adult from how your childhood was?
Unfortunately, I do in some respects, but I do believe it really affected the choices that I made in a positive way as well too. As far as the finances go, the negative way is that I chose a career that paid very well. And for my entire marriage, unfortunately, I always made more money than my husband. So in that regard, I was just like my mom. I made more money than my husband. She made more money than her husband. I was self-employed. She was self-employed. My husband was W-2. My dad was W-2. So there's similarities there. But because of their alcoholism, because of their fighting all the time and spoiling their kids, I decided that I was not going to be that kind of mother and I was not going to have that kind of relationship. I wouldn't marry someone for money like my mother actually did, she thought at the time, but where she came from more of an extreme poverty situation than anything. So it was a tremendous move up for her. So I wasn't going to marry like that. I wasn't going to find Mr. Rich Man. And in the court reporting field, I could have flirted, I suppose, and found myself a lawyer, and maybe more than one to choose from. But on my sexy, skinny days and young days, I probably could have. But I decided that I was going to marry for love and it was going to be forever. And so when my husband and I did meet and we were like instant friends from the very beginning, just absolutely loved being together. And that was all the way through the end. I chose that. I said, this is what I want. I want a happy marriage, a happy home forever. I don't want to have divorce after divorce. And my husband came from that. His mom was married 3 times. So he did not want to be in that kind of up and down, hilly, the man's in life, he's not in my life. I mean, he's in my life, he's not in my life. He didn't want that either. He wanted to be that man that was steady and would be there for his kids, his entire life. And, I made that compromise. It's happily ever after sometimes has a price. And so the price for me was that we weren't able to put a lot of money aside. Basically, when we moved to live with near my mom, that's when we basically started contributing. And so that was 9 years ago. If we had been giving anything to our retirement fund, we would have been in a much better situation. But 5 kids, like I said, private schools, colleges, weddings, and I'm sorry to say, very poor excuses and very poor money management. that, now I look back on and realize, but then I didn't know, unfortunately.
Yeah, but you don't know what you don't know, as Jonathan from Choosify often has said in the past. It's one of those things that I myself have had to learn to give my past self some grace. And it's one of those things that, you know, when you make those kind of mistakes, it's very easy to beat yourself up about it. Oh, I should have known this, but you didn't. And you made the best decision you could at the time with the information you had, and I'm sure your kids really appreciate all the money that you spent on them, the private schools and the college and the weddings. And, at least you have this kind of legacy of my money went towards these really great experiences for my kids that they're going to remember. And, it's not necessarily the best for your own future, of course. Like the traditional advice is, pay for your own future first, then pay for your kids. But regardless, in the end, it probably came out pretty positive and you turned it around and you still have time. You're still young. 9 years ago, I mean, 9 years is a lot of time to put into the market. I know it's not 30 years, but 9 years is quite a bit of time. And so I have faith that you're going to catch up just fine. And I know a little bit more because I know your numbers and stuff. So I think you definitely are. But yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And so I'd love to jump into how you found the FI movement. I know we alluded to that a little bit with how you came to it because of when your husband died and the financial dire straits you were in. And then you kind of found the FI movement as a way to pull yourself out of that. But how specifically did you find it? Who introduced you to it? Who was the first voice in the community you heard? I'd love to hear that story.
Okay, I'm smiling and almost laughing, and it probably comes through in the audio. No one introduced me to it. It's funny. Well, the first voices I heard were Jonathan and Brad. If you're going to listen to anybody, my goodness, I just happened upon the best. Well, telling you that to me, they were the best because that is exactly what I needed at the time and still now, and probably forever. But the reason I found them is when my husband died. He died the day before we were selling our house, signing on the papers. And that same day, we were signing on the papers for the condo we were buying in the 55 plus community we were going to be moving into. And so that threw that sale into a tailspin. But then a couple days into that new journey of widowhood, my realtor called me and said, Kathy, Houston, we have a problem. She told me, did you know that your husband was the only one on the home deed? Your name wasn't on there. And that took me all the way back to 8 years before when we first moved there in order to reduce the monthly payment and get a better interest rate. My husband's credit scores were better than mine. So we did do that. We put him on the house only. But we refied when the interest rates were under 5%. Remember those days? I think we got a 2% rate. And I thought that meant that we got, both of us on the title because we changed everything, right? No, we only changed the mortgage. We didn't change the title. So I couldn't sell the house. The house had to go into probate for 8 months. And so here I was purchasing a condo now with no money or only money that I had in the bank or taking out whatever money we had put in for our retirement. And I'm not 559 and a half yet. So the penalties and interest, I'm not going to do that. So what am I going to do? I've got to figure this out. So fortunately, the seller of my condo understood what I was going through. I mean, I still hadn't, buried my husband and everything like that. And it's like, what am I going to do? Am I going to move? Am I going to stay? Am I going to cancel these sales? My stuff was already in Maryland in a pod waiting for me. So I had, a couple days worth of clothes, no furniture anymore. So I could, continue sleeping on the couch. And it was pretty bad, the situation I was in. I felt homeless. So luckily the seller said, okay, fine, we'll give you some more time, figure this out. But, if you decide you're not going to move, please let us know as soon as possible so we could put it back on the market. And so they held it for me a little longer. And I decided, wait a minute, all my memories are here. Everywhere I'm driving around here is making me cry. It's a memory. I mean, my mom had died the year before, my sister 2 years before that. So I was mentally a wreck, and especially with my husband. So I said, no, I'm going to go through with this purchase. So I called up his life insurance company and said, is there any way that you could give me the proceeds sooner? And I told them the situation, and they were like 100% behind me. And they said, yes, we'll give it to you. And so I went to the realtors and said, yes, we can make this purchase now and I can sell this house now, but I'm not going to sell until we get the money in hand because I still need a place to live. So we worked that out, and I was able to take every penny that was from his life insurance and put it onto the purchase of the condo. But that still meant I have a huge mortgage still, because the difference between living in South Carolina and Maryland was quite a huge difference. And I could have bought 2 or 3 of my homes for that price where I was living in South Carolina. And had I stayed, I would have had a paid off mortgage right now. I kick myself sometimes. I could have made it through the sorrow, perhaps, but I am glad that I moved and living here in the condo. Tim never lived here, so this is an absolute fresh start. It's a fresh slate. I didn't know anybody. And the new job that I had, I didn't know anybody there either. So it was, when everything's new, you have less time to focus on sadness and things like that. I still did, I promise you. But, I have so many other things to focus on. And the drive up from South Carolina to Maryland, I had 8 hours to listen to the radio or to podcasts. And I've never turned a podcast on before. And so it's like, I need to start understanding finances because, whatever boon that I did get, I don't have anymore now. And then I learned that because of the probate and the laws in the state, half of the sale of our home was going to go to the 5 kids. So the money that I thought would at least go in my retirement fund, half of it wouldn't anyway. And so that was not any fun. And I still don't have that money. Unfortunately, didn't learn a lot from the podcast, of that 1 or 2 weeks that I was listening to them about not putting them into a CD. So I put them into a CD and locked it up for a year. And so it's been earning 5%. Wow. Anyway, but at least it was earning something and I didn't spend it and, that kind of stuff. So that is going to go into my retirement fund when I get it out next month, and going to go in Vanguard, and it's going to be, making money from the get-go as opposed to the money that we did have in, I'll call it a brokerage for 1.75% or something. So we were not making much money with them, but I listened to I looked up on the podcast. I said, I've got to learn things about finance. And so I put in finance in the search button, and I just kind of scrolled and I said, choose FI, what's FI? Financial independence. Oh, I need that. So I turned on choose FI, and I think I started at 1. I mean, the very first one, and I just started listening and got to the 200s when I reached the Choose FI, the retreat that we went to, the Camp FI. So I was well into the 200s at that point, with an occasional going current so I could, hear the current stuff and I wouldn't be too far behind. But that's how I got into the FI journey, is just listening to the podcasts and realizing how much I didn't know. And then, the books they were recommending, I started getting through the library and started listening to some of the audio books. So I'm half audiobooks, half podcast now. But, I use every minute. I'm walking the halls of the courthouse, I'm listening to a podcast or an audiobook. I am not wasting any downtime whatsoever. I don't have time to waste. The sand in my hourglass is diminishing quickly. And you realize that the older you get. So I'm so much better. I've made so many good decisions, but it was basically thanks to the 5 movement and all the teaching that I've gotten.
You hear that, Brad and Jonathan? I hope you do, because this is one thing that I think Brad talks about that he loves the most about Choose FI is the impact it has on people. And so I just hope they are both listening. I have no idea if Jonathan knows this show exists, but I know Brad does because he helped me name it. Throughout that entire journey that you had where your husband and you were going to move to Maryland and then he died and the home wasn't in your name and you went through all of that. What advice would you give to people today to kind of avoid having to go through that kind of thing? I mean, for example, half the house going to your kids because it went to probate. Would you give the advice of make sure you've got a will, make sure that your accounts are straight? What advice would you give to people?
Thank you so much. That is so important because I can tell you so many people do not want to talk about death. They don't want to talk about their parents' death. They don't want to talk about their own death. And my husband kept putting me off. January of 23, when he died, I had the papers done and I tried to get him to sign. And he said, no, I don't want to do it. Every week trying to get him to do it. February, we went away at a work job where they paid for the hotel for me. And I worked the weekend and got paid for it. And we had a nice weekend at a golf resort. And I had the papers there. And, Thursday and Friday and Saturday, he would not sign them. And so you're talking about just 3 months before he died. I would say when you start a relationship, before you start, these days, the way everybody is these days, I wouldn't do a relationship without a prenup. And so each one of you do the prenup, especially you ladies. Oh my goodness, please do that. When you get into your 40s and 50s, the guys go through that middle age craziness where the younger ladies are looking better than you are. So I would say definitely do the prenups before you do anything, and definitely do the will. I mean, if for you, Megan, it doesn't sound like you're married. So you individually, for your own assets, you need to protect your own assets. I mean, it's a CYA. So protect your own assets and do the thinking for the families that are going to be grieving for you. Don't make them at the most fog-brained part of their life make these stupid decisions. So get it done. And this is, to me, I'm telling you, this is a way of saying, I love you. And this is how I'm showing you. I am taking the stress off of you of making very difficult decisions. I'm making them for you. And, even videotaping yourself saying, yes, I am giving my diamond rings to you, Susie Q. And sorry, Mary Jane, I'm not giving them to you. Do you know why? Because you're going to hawk them. If they hear your voice in a video or something like that, you saying it, then there's going to be no fighting at the distribution of assets. So definitely the will. At a certain point when you get in your assets, a trust is actually a better idea. Sometimes people say a trust from the get-go. I'm not a lawyer, and it's certainly not in that area. And so I cannot advise you. And I promise you, state by state by state changes. Maryland has a death tax. We love you so much, we're going to tax you on the back end too. So I don't even know what the death tax is, but I'm telling you, I'm not going to live here when I die. They're not going to get more money out of me than they already are. Get your decisions made and reevaluate every time there's a new addition to your assets. If you didn't own a home when you first got this stuff done, make sure that house is in that trust. Make sure that there's on the paperwork who are the beneficiaries for every single checking account you have, retirement account, anything that's an asset. Make sure who are the beneficiaries. And then check them out every once in a while because maybe you don't like your Aunt Susie anymore, who you were going to give something. She treated you wrong. So take her off as the beneficiary, replace her with someone else. I would say some of the people in FI say do a rebalancing once a year of your assets. If you're 70-30 equities to bonds, make sure you're still at that 70-30 if that's your goal. Well, reevaluate your beneficiaries. Is everything the same as it was last year? We added a boat. Oh, let's make sure that the boat has who's going to get the boat and put that in there and update. Believe me, it's a way of you saying that I love you. I cannot stress to you enough how much of a brain fog I was in for months. I would do what I had to do at the time, but I couldn't even think about tomorrow. I mean, Google Calendar is still my brains. If it's not in Google Calendar, I do not know what I'm doing right now, let alone tomorrow. But I'm so much better than I was in May of 23. And so help your family out and your loved ones. And if you're giving your money to charities, make sure that they're the beneficiary on everything, or, choose this charity gets this charity gets that, but reevaluate, because even those charities go bad. All it takes is a change in leadership, that they decided they're not going to serve these people anymore. They're going to serve those instead. And, you were hoping to help a certain group of people. And so now your money's not going to do that. So definitely reevaluate and do what it takes. And I don't care if you're 20 years old or if you're 30 years old. If you own anything in your own name, someone is going to get it when you die. And it may be someone you don't want to. And there was one podcast that on the Choose FI that was phenomenal. She was a widow, and her mother-in-law got over $100,000 of her husband's and her money. And that's how we are these days. We're going to look a gift horse in the mouth, free money. Oh yeah, honey, we're going to sue you. I don't care if you're my family or not. And I, as a court reporter, I can tell you, I took many depositions in divorce cases where there was a lot of money involved. And the attorneys would love to spend your money and drag this out as long as they can and take as much money of the estate as they can. And I can't say that all attorneys are like that, but those ones on the cases that I was the court reporter of, that's exactly what they were doing. Or that other family member that wants your money will fight till the death, and they don't care how much it costs, because the estate is paying these attorneys. So you don't want that to happen. And it won't happen if you make your desires, even in your 20s and your 30s. If you make your life insurance beneficiary choices, if you make your retirement from work, your 401k, make sure your beneficiaries are who you want them to be.
Yeah, that is all very sound advice. And there's a couple resources I want to say. The Choose FI episode, I know exactly who you're talking about. It's the woman whose husband died he was biking and hit his head, and it was just a freak accident. And it's one of the most impactful episodes that I've ever listened to. And believe me, after listening to that, I was on my partner's butt to get his will done. I mean, I am not a nagging person. I nagged the crap out of him because, and it wasn't because I wanted to get anything. It's because he has family who's estranged from him, and it's family who are close enough that they could get his assets. And I was like, do you want this going to these family members? Do you want half of it or all of it? Because this person is crafty enough to do that. They've done crap like that in the past. And he was like, oh my God, you're right. And he did it. And he has a will. It's not notarized, but I mean, I don't think it has to be technically, at least not in North Carolina. It doesn't. I got mine notarized because I have a lawyer for a dad. And if anybody's worried about cost, so there's actually a resource. It's called freewill.com, and they are funded by nonprofits. And so that's why it's free. And I believe that's where I got my will. But I would just do a Google search on how to do your will for free, because there are legitimate free resources, not like free for the first 7 days type of stuff. No, it's like legit always free. And I made it. And I had a notary at work, so I just had them notarize it. I called a couple people in the office and said, hey, come witness my will being signed. And it was pretty simple. And definitely I agree about just updating your beneficiaries on all your accounts, not just your retirement accounts, your savings accounts, your checking account, all of it, because that's the number one thing that people will look at after you die that supersedes any wills. At least, again, in North Carolina. I only know this about North Carolina. I am also not a lawyer, but because I did my will, that's what I know. I also went to a probate 101 class. You mentioned getting a prenup, especially as a woman. And I will say, believe me, we all have prenuptial agreements. If you think that's unromantic, the government's already making a prenuptial agreement for you. You just have no say. They're going to do with your money what they want, but there's already an agreement because you live in a certain state. Might as well make your own. It might not be romantic, but it's like you said, a CYA, cover your assets. Oh yeah, I'm really glad we're talking about this, Kathy. And I think it's something that needs to be talked about more. So I want to hear more about your financial independence journey, though. And why did financial independence call out to you? What's your why of FI?
It's an unusual one, honestly. For 40 years, while my husband and I were, 38 while we were married, and then the years after, I always wanted to be a missionary, basically. I wanted to help the deaf and hard of hearing. I did for a job, with captioning. I still do. And in a way, I feel like, okay, I'm helping. But some of the jobs that I've done, I feel like I can help in a much greater way. And then when I started learning how people with disabilities are treated in some parts of the world, where still today, I worked with a man who got a Ford Scholarship to come from Ghana to the University of Chicago to get his master's degree. And he was literally deaf. And luckily, he had the ability to speak. So he had lost his hearing later on in life, so he could talk. So he could speak at the classes, which really did help him. But as far as his classes went, he had to look at the captioning, read the words. But here he was, PhD, and he went back to Ghana, and you can't work. You can't hear. You're deaf. You have a disability. So he became what essentially is a TA in a college back in Ghana. And it's an okay job, but he's at the level where he could be a full bred professor there. He's, American college educated now. And so he really has an up, compared to some of those people there, and they won't give him the opportunity. If somebody who has hearing loss, who is deaf in some of the countries of the world, if they can even get an education, if they will even be allowed outside of the home, because they're an embarrassment, because they have a curse. And so I want to help those people. I want to go there and help them. And guess what? I don't have enough money to. And in order to do that, I would have to link up with some kind of agency that would control my life. I would have to go every weekend and do fundraising. And so work 5 days a week, go every weekend fundraising for how long? A couple of years? I mean, okay, if that's what I got to do. But I was really hoping to not have to have anybody control me. Again, going back to my mom and just that financial freedom bug. I would like to be able to do this on my own. So I began looking and saying, how much money, you remember the rule of the 4% rule and everything? How much money would I need in this country, in that country? And with my Social Security that I will eventually get, how much will I need? And then how soon can I go and begin to help these people? And so I am in that discovery stage now. So that's my why. I want to get to that FI number, not necessarily for my kids. I've got assets now, and I've got life insurance and things for my kids and grandkids. So they're going to be taken care of now because of that. But I want to be able to spend the rest of the sand in my hourglass really making a difference and reaching those people and giving them the hope that with education, they can be somebody and they can do something, and bring education, bring hearing, bring the words to people who can't hear, bring the signs to those who need to even be taught sign language. And that's the kind of difference. So that's my why of FI. And it looks like I'm going to make it. And there's been some even things you don't even know about, Megan, that are in line, that some changes may be happening where my salary may double or triple in the next 30 to 60 days. You talk about my FI journey going on steroids. I'm scared but excited at the same time, and wondering, do I give up my comfort life, my job that I love? I'm beginning to love this area now and the friends I've made. And do I just stay here and take a little bit more time to get to that FI? Or do I put it on steroids? Do I put it on rocket fuel and launch quicker? So I'm in a big decision point now about that. But regardless, I'm going to be able to do it because of what I've learned, thanks to everybody in FI.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Are you willing to share details about these potential, changes that might be coming down the pike?
I have a job where my salary is great, and there's actually additional 1099 income that can be made on the side. And then I have my voice to print captioning as well too. But, having to hire the independent contractors, I don't get 100% of the money. So I get my little small percent after I pay them. There's actually two other jobs. And in order to get those two other jobs, you have to be some of the top people in the country with the skill set that I have as a court reporter. There's a job that they've actually asked permission to create, and they've told me they want me to apply when that job is listed. And so it's making me sound like the job is mine, but I still have to interview and all that other kind of stuff. But then I decide whether I'm going to take the job. But then there's also another job that I've been pushed into looking into at least. And I sent off my resume and a cover letter. It's in their hands, but it's for the United States Congress. So that would be a pretty cool job. And you got to admit some bennies. And so I don't know. I can stay where I'm at. I can have one of those two other jobs, but both offer more, possibly more money than one offers double or triple the money that I'm currently making. And the other one, yes, the salary is more, but the rest I have to learn about. I don't know much about yet. But so we'll see. But I've upped the contributions that I make out of my salary from my paycheck. The first month I got here, I didn't understand all of that. I'm telling you, I was new. And so my first paycheck I brought home for the month less than I could have worked at McDonald's for. And it was like, here I am in the most expensive state. And I just spent all my husband's life insurance money. And what am I going to live? Well, I made it through. I say it by the grace of God. But I honestly don't know how I made it through that month, making $800 my first month in Maryland. So I definitely went to HR and said, my first check, oh my gosh, it's not supposed to be this small. What did I do wrong? And well, it's your contributions. You wanted, you gave this much money to your TSP. And but that's what I thought. I wanted to make the max that I was supposed to make. Well, in order to make the max, you got to do this. And you did a little bit more than what you were. Oh, no kidding. I did. Will help me correct that. And they said, well, tone it down and get yourself caught up to where you thought you were supposed to be. And then when you get caught up and it's more stable, then start adjusting it upwards. And so I've been doing that steadily, but now I'm giving an extra $1,000 per month into my retirement. So that just from work. And then I created another LLP for that 1099 income that I told you about. So now that I'm the president of that LLP, I can do another SEP plan. And so all of this, I transferred over my money from that 1.75 managed brokerage into Vanguard. And so I'm at the 0.0, whatever it is now, 3 or whatever Vanguard charges. So my money's making more money now. And I've taken every subscription and everything that could cost me money. I've reduced my budget like you wouldn't believe. And I even, because of one of the ministries I work with as a food minister, I even get a lot of food free. And so my food budget is like maybe $50 a month. It's pretty cool, but it's just me and the doggies.
That's incredible. And it's funny how there's almost a burden of choice when you have 3 great options for your life, those 2 jobs, and then potentially the missionary work. And, that's why I laugh at the burden of options because, which one do I choose out of all these amazing opportunities? So I wish you luck in that. And you've done so much. You've learned so much in such a small amount of time. And it's funny that your first paycheck, I'm really glad that the HR department helped you with that though, because sometimes they kind of say, here's your 401k plan, good luck. They don't really tell you. And I get why, because they're not financial advisors. They can't give you like advice, but they can at least tell you like, well, your paycheck is $800 because of this. And then you're like, oh, how do I change it to this? And then they can help you do that. So I'm glad they were able to do that. And it's funny you said that because I'm maxing my retirement account right now. And there was a payroll incident where they doubled the amount that they put into the 401k during one pay period. And most people were fine, but they had to reach out to me because they were like, okay, so you have so much coming out of your paycheck that your paycheck is only going to be, I think it was like $1,500. And I was like, oh, that's not going to work. And I mean, it was one of 2 paychecks a month, but it's still, I was like, that's going to make it a little tight for me this month. And I was the only one out of the whole company of 150 people that they had to reach out to. So I was like, that's interesting because I know I'm not the most high paid person at this job. I'm probably a low to mid tier person. So I'm like, anyway, but that's the FI movement for you. We're gung ho about contributing to our retirement plans. Which leads me to one of my next questions. What strategy are you using to reach financial independence? And how are you taking your timeline into account with the strategy you're using to reach financial independence?
Well, thanks to the advice that I got from the Camp FI Mid-Atlantic, I called up Social Security, made an appointment, and I learned that I can actually get a portion of my husband's Social Security when I turn 62. So I'm not 62 yet. So I'm going to be doing that. And then I think it's 67 is what they told me. I could begin drawing my own. You cannot draw both. So definitely take what you can from your husband's Social Security and then max out yours later. Keep working or something so that your money will actually be worth more when you do take it out. So at that point, I'm going to be taking out, and that's going to be at least 50% of what I'm going to be needing every month for whatever, what do we call it? Geo arbitrage. That's basically what I'll be doing. I will be able to practically live on what my Social Security will be. And so the extra money is going to be for the older years that I might need financial assistance or whatever like that. Or if, let's say that I do start a nonprofit or something in that country down, and I realize that I can't do everything. I've got to have a school or something like that. So the extra money that I will be putting aside and that I am putting aside that I would be drawing the 4% from would go for those expenses. And also the stuff like traveling back to see family and things like that. It's not going to be cheap. I still have to learn that FI travel stuff. That's still above my head. Like I said, that brain fog stuff, I'm very much behind in learning some stuff, but it's also so exciting. There's so much that you could learn with the FI education. There's always something new to learn. And so I have my federal government TSP. I have the money that's in Vanguard. And now I have the SEP plan with my 1099 income. And that's going to continue if I take that job that is double to triple what my earnings are right now. So that's going to continue. And so you're going to talk about, I'll really be able to put a lot of money into, SEP and into Vanguard. So I'm excited about that. And then the other thing I'm going to be doing is selling my condo. I have decided that I can definitely rent much cheaper than own in this area. And even if I do take, let's say, the Congress job, let's say that ends up being pretty lucrative or a pretty good thing, maybe it gives me more free time and I could work on the side, or I could do ministry or something, or education, learn more sign language, something. Maybe that's the job I'll take, or I'll stay where I'm at. Where I'm at in this 55 plus community, I can get a condo for 90,000. So that is 1/3 of what my current one is. And so I can plunk that money down from the sale of the condo, buy one for cash, and put the rest in my retirement. And I'm not going to be where people my age are. That's okay. I'm not going to require the lifestyle some of them want to lead. When you geo arbitrage, you can live in a much cheaper country and your money goes farther, and your lifestyle there wouldn't compare to what it would cost here in America, but that's what I'm planning to do.
Yeah, that's excellent. And there's actually, when you were thinking of the learning how to do the travel hacking and things like that, I know that ChooseFI has travel rewards articles on their site. So I'll link those in the show notes. There's also, I think there's a FI couple, and I forget who they are, who moved to Portugal because Portugal is such a cheap place to live. So let me look up who they are.
While you're doing that, the class that ChooseFI has is called Travel 101. And I did sign up for it and I started, but I was in the brain fog. And so when I would go to the next lesson, I didn't remember the one before. And so I would go back and I would listen to it, and I wouldn't go back in the lesson 2 and I wouldn't remember one again. So it's okay. I got to put this aside because this isn't too important to not learn. I want to wait till I can concentrate on it. So I could actually start it back up again now, and probably will soon.
That's great. Thank you for telling us that. I believe it's the folks from Our Rich Journey. They have a course on how to move to Portugal, which is pretty cool. It's called How to Move to Portugal, a step-by-step course to relocating and living in Portugal. So I'm going to link that in the show notes because that could be an interesting resource for somebody who wants to live there. It's supposed to be a beautiful, really beautiful place. Okay, we're starting to go towards the end of the episode. And what I like to do is talk a little bit about current struggles and wins that you have right now.
Well, the biggest struggle is widowhood and the loneliness that you get from that. Having moved here to Maryland, where I have 2 kids and 4 grandkids, I thought, oh, I'm going to move 45 minutes from my kids. I'm going to get to see them all the time. And I wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. And they don't call and they don't come over. Well, when you got young kids, your life is busy. And I guess I forgot that. So I have to be the one to involve myself in their lives. So that's hard. So finally, when I was starting to come out of the brain fog, I said, you know what? I got to remake my life. I've got to, this is part 2. I'm the playwright, put pen to paper and what do I want to make this new life? What do I want Act 2 to be? And I actually made myself start getting involved in things. And luckily, this 55 plus community, it's called Leisure World. I'm telling you, folks, it's a wonderful place and pretty affordable for Maryland, believe it or not. There's also one in Arizona, I believe. I don't know if there's somewhere else. But I started looking up the activities and what will fit with my schedule. And honestly, the five in me now, it's, $35 to go to this? I'm not going there. That costs, I can eat for free at home. I'm being pretty picky about the activities that I'm choosing, but I don't want to say that I'm going to stay single, but maybe I'll consider another relationship, but I'm not there now. But certainly for a struggle, if anybody knows of a way that I can be impacting the community that I want to, that would certainly lead me in a great direction. I've been a little bit held back, let's call it that. And so if I could get out there sooner or in a part-time way or something that I'm not thinking of. Somebody said Peace Corps. When I looked it up, well, they want people with bachelor's degrees. Guess what? I'm 12 credits shy. I have to put things on hold sometimes. So I'm a senior in college, but I don't have that degree yet. And then what's really funny is I went through 20 years of colleges when I was helping other college students get their degrees. So, but I don't have one myself. So that's one of them.
Real quick before you move on, sorry, I want to say something about that. So, from what I understand, I think certain colleges allow people over a certain age to attend classes and get degrees for free. Is there a possibility that you could gain those 12 credits potentially?
I will look that up for Maryland, but I can promise you that for South Carolina, my husband qualified. I think it was 65 and above. Maybe it was 60. I wasn't 60 at the time. But yes, that is absolutely true. So my husband could have gone to public universities in the state of South Carolina for free for his classes. And unfortunately, it's after his stroke when his mind wasn't what it used to be. Even just understanding how to maneuver the computer became difficult for him, let alone understanding the application process for colleges. So college people out there, university people, please make the application process easier. Some of us, we can't do all the work that you want us to go through. So I think there should be an application process for the younger folks that can do all that stuff, but then the older folks who want to go to school, make the application process easier. And it's not. It's one size fits all.
Yeah, accessibility matters, and I completely agree. Yeah, continue with your struggles. I know you had more that you wanted to talk about.
Well, it's making that decision of keeping the condo instead of selling it. So I'm working through that. I think it's the right move to whatever I can get out of it to make it work for me rather than paying that large interest payment every month. Just things like that. And for those people that are Christians and believe in prayer, I could certainly use prayer that I make the right decisions. But that's basically, I still don't know what I don't know. So I don't know what to ask help for. And so that's the major thing that if anybody gets my contact information and wants to give me advice, I'm all ears. Believe me, I'm nothing but a sponge right now.
Yeah, and that's a great attitude to have because, not a lot of people are like that, especially some people later in their lives. They're kind of stuck in their ways and don't really want to learn more. And it's like, oh, it's worked for me so far. So I love that you're a sponge. I want to switch to talking about your wins. Let's talk about some highlights of your life right now.
Well, I did mention some of those earlier about upping the contributions I changed my mortgage to a biweekly. So now it's going to at least make one extra payment a year and it's going to knock off thousands of dollars on the back end of the loan. And I'm also paying a little extra, but I know people are saying, don't do that, put it in your retirement fund instead. But I made it a little bit, but I'm paying extra on principal every month just because I can't stand seeing that $1,000 a month going to interest. I paid off $36,000 in debt in a year.
That's amazing. Great job. That's incredible.
Well, that was the buckling down and getting your stuff in order and not wanting to make all these payments and just you got to make the decision to change in order to change. And the FI journey helped me make that decision. My credit score has gone up, and that's great. I don't know how important it's going to be because I don't think I'm going to buy any real estate or anything that I'm going to really, where credit report's going to make a difference. Maybe it will be if I rent somewhere and they've got to run those things to check that you're good. I have emergency savings of a year. Now, that's only because of the money that's in the probate. So after that comes out, it's not going to be a year's worth, but it's going to go to work for me. And actually, all of it's going to go into an account, and half of it's going to be considered the emergency fund. But it's going to be invested money as opposed to 5% in a CD locked up. I got one of my kids tuned in to Choose FI, and he's now starting to read some of the books as well. And so that's pretty exciting. I gave J.L. Collins's book to my daughter. So let's see if she actually starts reading that. And it was a great book. My son, he's looking at the military FI stuff, but he already knows a lot of stuff. So I'm very grateful that at least with the military that he's gotten some really good education and people have taught him well. I wish that I had been the one to do it, but I can't take the credit for that. And my coworkers, one of them, she had her husband die when she was younger, and she was 36. And I said, "Did you happen to be married to your husband for 10 years?" And she said, "Oh, yes, I think 10 years and something months." And I said, "Did you know that you are entitled to his Social Security and that could be part of your retirement plan?" "No, I didn't know that." Call Social Security, because I learned from, I think it was Mark, who was one of my judges or whatever at the Camp FI Mid-Atlantic. He's the one who told me. And because he told me that, I was able to pass that on to my coworkers. I've been able to help them with a lot of, what's an AUM? And what do you mean 1%'s not? That sounds good to me. No, it isn't. And I was able to show them the difference, the money invested over 30 years at 1% and at 0.5. And so that when they saw the hundreds of thousands of dollars they're losing over decades, it's like, you need to reconsider where your money's at as well, too. So I've been able to be a help. And then other widows. It's amazing when you become a widow, how widows pop up everywhere in front of your face. And they've been there the whole time, but I'm now part of that community. And so we have that camaraderie. And so I can talk to them now as a widow when perhaps I couldn't before. So maybe we need Choose FI widowhood or something. Maybe we need to start something like that. But it really, your life changes after you've lost a spouse. Those of us that are struggling through it and at the brain fog and the sorrow and the loneliness, so I'm able to help be a resource to them.
That's amazing. And I know that you specifically want to give back to a certain kind of community, but it sounds like you're already giving back to this widow community. And maybe it's not the one that you had originally targeted, but I mean, I can hear the passion for helping these people in your voice, and you've probably made some pretty intense impacts on these people. And I always say, if you see a need in the community that's not being met, you've got two hands, you've got a voice. You could make a blog, you could make a podcast. Podcasting is hard, but you could make a blog and you could be that person and you could write those stories. Like, you have so many great stories about what it means to be a widow and what you've learned coming up to it and afterwards and every day since, and all of the different advice that you would give people who lost their spouse. And it could be also for men who've lost their wives as well. A lot of the time it goes both ways. So I could see that as you filling a need for at least this community. So I don't know if you've thought about that, but yeah.
I actually have. And so what I'm trying to do is something in the Christian world. They say, be a missionary where you're at. Okay, I'm not out of the country right now, but who can I help that is in my sphere of influence? Who can I help that's around me? And frankly, if all of Americans would just take the time to just look at the people around them, how they could help. So I'm actually beginning to think there's a lot of poverty outside of the walls of this 55 plus community. And what about those kids? Nobody's teaching those kids. Nobody's teaching those young adults that are going off to college. They're going to meet those credit card companies, and they're going to get their credit cards right away, and then they're going to start ruining their lives from the moment they step on campus. So I'm thinking maybe I can do something in my little neck of the woods here. And so I'm not going to let that replace my long-term dream and goal, but at least I can do something now with what I've learned now. And yes, I am doing some of that now, believe me. When you're so excited about something and passionate about this like I am, you can't stop talking about it. So I'm that way with the Lord. So my Christianity comes out no matter what I do and no matter where I'm at. And so does my love of FI and helping people. And so I'm trying to do that. But if I do it in an organized way, like create a nonprofit, create a website, create a blog, that seems like more work to me. So I'm a little bit scared of it. I'm not against partnering with somebody that would help me with all the details of it and everything, but I don't want to create more work for myself. So I'm a little scared in that regard. But if people are out there that says, yes, let's do it together. Okay, let's talk.
I actually completely understand that fear because I felt the same way about doing a podcast. I've wanted to do a podcast basically since I started talking about money as I don't want to say business or influencer. That sounds so bleh, but just being a voice in the community. And I didn't do it right away because it was intimidating. I would say don't do podcasting if you want it to be less work because it's a lot of work. But a blog is pretty easy. I mean, you could use blogger.com is I think free, at least it was when I last used it, and you can just write on there. You can just create whatever right on there and in your community. Hey, I wrote this blog. Do you guys want to check it out? You could, if you're on Facebook, the Camp FI alumni groups, you can say, hey, I don't know if you guys remember me, but I'm Kathy. I presented at Camp FI Mid-Atlantic and I started a blog. Here's a couple articles I wrote. It's about widows. If you have any widows in your life who might be able to learn from it, here's some articles I wrote. Done. It's one of those things that I understand not wanting to add work. And I am contending with a little bit of burnout myself because I took on the podcast. But the podcast is the very last thing that I would give up now because I love it so much. And I feel like it would probably be something similar to you where it might be more work, but it will be one of those pieces of work that you're like, okay, it's work, but it gives me so much energy and I can see the impact that it's making that it's worth it. You know what I mean? And I don't know, it's just a suggestion. If you ever need help, I'm here. You can reach out to me. I can help you. I'm totally down for giving you resources and helping you figure out, if you want to do this, like what path you can take and what's the simplest way to do it.
Well, thank you. And if you think about what my job is, writing at almost 300 words a minute, I can probably use my steno machine and my laptop and zip those things out a lot faster than it takes some of y'all to type.
Yeah, I bet. Especially since I'm pretty sure I use just these two fingers, my two pointer fingers to type because I did not learn how to type correctly in school. I was one of those kids who looked under the thing that was hiding your hands when they were trying to teach you how to type keyboard. Anyway, so we are coming to the end of our time. And the last thing I'd like you to leave the community with is a life hack or recommendation or learning that you'd like to leave the community with before we part ways.
I think the biggest one that I always hear people complain about is that they don't have enough time to read. They don't have enough time to add things to their life. And it's, you know what? Yes, you do. You have the same amount of time that I do, but you're being lazy with it. And so fess up to it, admit to it. And perhaps it's that fear thing. A lot of us have fear that if I learn something to do, then I'm going to have to do it because I'm going to feel guilty or whatever. But I can tell you from one of the audiobooks that I'm reading right now, every single, and I'm about 9 hours of 17 hours of this book. So it's every single person that's been interviewed has been talking about how important it is to read, how important it is to read. And so you can read for free at the library. And in fact, I learned that I can be signed up with more than one library. I didn't know that. So I'm about ready to go crazy and see if maybe some other ones can offer me books that the other ones can't. But, you have the time. Start with just waking up a half an hour earlier. And that half an hour will make the difference in your life. Like I told you, I have 2 bathrooms. So I have the 5 for Dummies. I've got that book on top of one toilet and I've got my court reporting magazines on top of the other. You can read a page. If you've got kids, you close that bathroom door. They don't want to come in when you're in there anyway. So you can get a page read, and you wouldn't believe how many pages you can get done in a month. And you can get work done when you're waiting at the doctor's office. You can be reading. I mean, there's so much. You be driving, speed up that audiobook to 2. Yes, they sound like Mickey Mouse, but you can skip those audiobooks and make them go faster, and you can get through them. But definitely start reading, because you don't know what you don't know, but also you won't learn what you need to learn, basically, unless you make some changes. And I was forced in that change mode. A lot of widows, they go into depression and a fog, and they just stay there. They can't make any changes, and they can't move, anything in the house that had their husband's whatever on it. And I was forced into it. You can make changes. So maybe I do need to make the change of a blog and not be so afraid of it. But, examine your fears. Why are you afraid? What is it about the fear you're afraid of? And start writing it down and start thinking about it. Does it go back into childhood? Or is it negative self-talk? But, fear stops, and especially women, there's a lot of fear that women especially have. It's probably worse when you're a widow now. But, examine that fear. Don't let it conquer you. Examine it, learn the reasons why, unpeel it like an onion, and just get to the center of it, and you'll be shocked. And then once you know, you can go.
I like that. Once you know, you can go. And I really love the idea of confronting your fears and getting to the center of it. And of course, when you said peel back the onion, it made me think of Shrek and the donkey saying that cakes have layers. So you could peel back the layers of the cake too. But yeah, I really enjoy hearing you say that, because it's one of those things that looking at why you're afraid is super important. But also remember that if there's something you want to start and you're afraid to do it, and you start it and it does end up not working out, that's okay. You aren't committed to doing this thing, this blog, this podcast, whatever. You are allowed to quit if it's not serving what you want for your life. It's totally fine. I hate the idea of people saying quitters are losers or whatever. No, that's not true. Quitters know what they really want, and they are the ones who focus on what their time means to them, and they're not going to dedicate time to anything that they don't want to. And so they quit things that don't serve them anymore. They quit being afraid. They quit hanging on to their husband's past things, like you said, and they create new friends. They move to new places. They geo arbitrage, and nothing has to be permanent. You can always change things. So I love that you said that. I think people have probably learned so much from you. All right, Kathy, thank you so much for being here. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
And thank you all that are listening as well, too, because it's because of you guys that I've got the boldness to even come on.
Thanks for listening to the EverydayFI podcast. If you're loving the show, here are some things you can do. Number 1, subscribe in your favorite podcast player and share the show with your friends and family. Number 2, please leave a review. I'm always looking for ways to improve the show. Number 3, check out my website, EverydayFI.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and leave comments for myself and the guest. Number 4, if you're interested in sharing your own financial independence story, you can find a submission form at everyday-fi.com/podcast. And finally, number 5, join my Patreon membership for only $5 a month at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast. This is a one-woman show, so every little bit counts. See you next time as we continue to go down the path to financial freedom.